Hello and welcome to the next video in our series. In this video, we will talk about how to configure the splash screen for the Houzi app. So what is a splash screen? When your app is opened, there is a brief period while the native app loads Flutter. By default, during this time, the default Flutter app shows a plain white splash screen. However, in Houzi, we have customized the splash screen to show the Houzi logo. In this video, we will guide you on how to configure your own logo as a splash screen for both Android and iOS. There are significant changes in the way splash screens are handled in Android 12 API 11.31 and above compared to earlier Android versions. Before Android 12, you had full control over the splash screen design. You could display an image or logo covering the entire screen and customize the background color. This allowed for greater flexibility in branding and design. With the release of Android 12, the splash screen is now more standardized. Android 12 introduced a mandatory splash screen that limits use of full screen images. Instead, you can only set a background color and a small logo in the center of the screen, while the system handles the animation and transition. This was done to ensure a more consistent user experience across apps. So when we talk about ways to set up splash screen in Flutter, there are two ways. Manual way, like manually editing the native files and splash screen resources, and the automatic way, where you use Flutter native splash package. Let's talk about the manual way. If you prefer more control over the splash screen, you can manually configure it. Here is how you can set it up for both Android and iOS. So when we switch to the Android Studio and expand the project structure on the left and expand Android and expand app, source, main, then expand resources and then expand values, there is a style.xml file. Here you will see the themes declared which point to launch background drawable. You can find the launch background in drawable directory here. Opening this launch background drawable shows that it is a layer list consists of two items. The first one is background color, the second is a bitmap that points to the IC launcher drawable. When you change these two resources, you effectively modify the splash screen items. So when you launch the app on both pre-Android 12 and post-Android 12 devices, you will notice the splash screen behaves differently. Android 12 displays the updated icon as the splash, while the older OS version shows the Houzi logo that resides in the drawable folder. It is because we have changed the launcher icon that has the same name iclauncher.png that resides in MIP folders. Android 12 and above are picking the iclauncher.png from MIP folder, whereas the older Android versions are picking iclauncher from default drawable folder. One important thing to note is if you have set up adaptive icon and no splash screen is configured on Android 12 and above, Android will automatically use the adaptive icon as the splash screen. To modify the background color, you can open the string.xml that resides in values folder. You can update the background color resource to match your branding here. For this demo, we are going to use the white color as background. The next is to change or update the splash logo. When we open launch background file here, you will find reference to splash icon. Replace the image file located at drawable iclauncher.png. Since you might have already set up your icons in previous tutorial, you can copy the icon resources from here and paste in drawable so it looks okay for older Android devices. Let's copy and simply replace it. Relaunching on older Android device will show icon is updated in the splash screen. Similarly, if we want to manually update the splash icon for iOS, we need to open the iOS project in Xcode. Expand iOS folder, then runner, and then appdelegate.swift. It will allow you to open iOS project in Xcode. So when you open your project in Xcode and click on your project from the left and go to the general tab here, scroll down to app icon and launch screen here. You will find launch screen field is pointing to launch screen.storyboard. If you want to change the file of your launch screen, you can change it from here. Or if you want to make changes in the launch screen, then you can open this launch screen in the editor and make modifications. Expand runner here and then open launch screen from here. It is showing the default Houzi color here. In the left side, click on View Controller and then on the view. From the right side, show Inspector window, and it will show you attributes for this view here. Click on the background color and set it to the white color. Expand the view here and you will see there is an image that points to launch image resource. Above the launch screen in the file section, there is an asset catalog here that contains app icon and launch image. Launch image assets shows empty here. We can simply import the icons that we generated using Figma. In previous tutorial, simply drag and drop inside launch image and place it at the 2x of the launch image options, and it shows as a launch image in our storyboard here. Unlike Android, iOS allows to modify your entire launch screen by adding different layout options here. Let's add a label at the bottom of the launch screen. Let's give it some constraints. Stick to the left, stick to the right, and have 20 points margin from the bottom layout guide. Let's center align it and set the font size to 40. Or you can have any background image as well. So simply add a background to this storyboard here and it will start showing as the launch screen of the app on iOS systems. So this is how you can manually set up both Android and iOS splash screens in your Flutter projects. Let's talk about setting the splash screen with Flutter native splash package. This method is quicker and easier if you want to avoid manually editing the files. You will use the Flutter native splash package to generate the splash screen icons. The first step is to add the Flutter native splash package dependency to your pub spec. Open the pub spec from the left file area and add the Flutter native splash package. Let's do pub get here. So it downloads the dependencies. Flutter native splash provides several configuration options. So let's add some of these options at the bottom of pub spec file here. Flutter native splash. If you want to generate splash for Android, set it to true. If you want to generate iOS splash screen, set it to true. And then there is a color option for the background color. Supply as the hex code here. We will choose the white color. And there is another option called image that takes path to the image file. So for Android, Google has provided guides on how to design your splash screen. Let's switch to Figma. We already have a file here that is 1152 by 1152, and it should have a safe area as 768 by 768, and all your icons should reside inside this safe area. It is showing as the white background. Let's hide the background and then export this to our resources folder as PNG. Copy this newly created splash, expand the assets, then icon, and paste. Now let's point our Flutter native splash configurations to use newly created splash image. Switch to the terminal here. Make sure you already have run flutter pubget in the command line or using the UI option here. So let's run the command to generate splash screens. Dart run flutter native splash create. So it says it has generated the splash screen for both iOS and Android. Switching to iOS, it shows it has updated the launch image with the supplied icon. Let's expand the Android resources folder. It has generated drawable HDPI, MDPI, and all other variations For the drawable, it also has updated launch background as well. So let's launch these on both Android versions. As we have already discussed, for Android 12 and above, splash screens are handled differently. You can only set the background color and logo. The system manages the rest, including the animation. So to ensure the compatibility with Android 12 and above, you have options to specify different settings for Android 12 and above. Simply add Android 12 and provide color and image you provided for older Android versions. Save and then rerun the command. This means you can set up different settings for Android 12 and above splash screens. You will notice that script has generated drawable night and values night variations for Android 12 and above. Optionally, you can add a branding image to your splash screens. Let's switch to Figma and design our branding image. This image should have the ratio of 200 by 80 or 5 by 2. Let's export this as PNG and then import to our project assets. Paste it to icon directory here. Add a new option in Flutter Native Splash options, branding, and then point it to the branding icon.png. Let's copy it to Android 12 option as well. Let's regenerate the splash screen. So when switching to iOS, we can see it has added the branding image to the splash screen. For Android 12 and above, it has created a separate styles.xml where it is pointing to the branding image in a separate attribute. And it has set the splash screen background as white, and it is pointing to the business icon in a separate attribute called launch screen animated icon. For older Android versions, it is only using the window background as launch background, which is the default background in drawable, which is meant to be used for pre-Android 12 versions. So when we open the default launch background here, we can see the layer list now contains three items. The most latest one is the branding bitmap here. So let's check these on the devices. Pre-Android 12 device and post-Android 12 device. Both are showing our custom logo and custom branding. And the iOS storyboard also has our custom logo and custom branding. To make it more simpler, we can take advantage of SVG drawable for Android 12 and above versions. Simply export the splash and branding as SVG from Figma. Then use the same native Android project that we use to convert app icons to Android friendly drawables. So that we can just keep the single version of splash icon and branding in default drawable folder. The theme from styles.xml will keep pointing to the same Android 12 branding and Android 12 splash drawables. And instead of having these as PNG in different variations, we have simply converted these to vector drawable. If you also want to keep consistent branding for both light and dark mode, you can delete night variations. You can read more about Flutter Native Splash on pub.dev and read more about the different options that Flutter Native Splash provided and customize your splash screen with the options they provide. So this was a tutorial about splash screens. Always test your splash screen on both Android and iOS to ensure it appears as expected. Make sure that for Android 12 and above, you follow the guidelines to display the splash screen correctly. So when designing your assets for the splash screen, always follow the platform guides on the different aspects and sizes of the resources to ensure your assets are optimized for different devices and resolutions. In this video, we walked you through configuring the splash screen manually and using the automatic method. Customize your splash screen to give your users a polished and branded experience from the moment they open your app. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next video.